Good evening. A very warm welcome to everyone present here for this talk on Chennai's land transformations and questions for its resilience. For those of you who are not familiar with CAG, Citizen Consumer and Civic Action Group is a 32-year-old non-governmental organization registered as a trust, and we work on consumer protection, urban governance, and environment protection. And I'm Saroja, by the way, and I head the consumer protection vertical in the organization. So as we all know, from the proposed eightfold expansion of the Chennai metropolitan area to smart cities projects, to evictions of slums for infrastructure projects, to the destruction of the Ennur Creek, Chennai's land use is rapidly and irreversibly changing with implications for its current and future resilience. The rising global demand for land and natural resources has made their protection an urgent priority, particularly in contexts where there is little or no legal protection against government-sponsored land use changes and land acquisition. Part of the difficulty is that the government rarely organizes public consultations where ordinary people can learn about the changes and take part in government decision-making processes for infrastructure projects and land acquisition. Neither can they negotiate on equal terms with consultants and firms proposing such plans. The problem is compounded by poor enforcement of environmental laws. India has a very poor record of compliance to environmental regulations, and violations have real and profound effects on the lives of people. Increasingly, projects are being located on the coast where there are transport advantages and land and water is more readily available. We see water bodies disappearing to garbage dump yards, large housing projects and malls, even as slums are being evicted under the guise of protection of rivers and lakes. Invariably, local communities and residents are absent from the processes that oversee social and environmental assessments and the management of ecological impacts. Hello. ஸோ இமீடியட்டாக எனக்கு என் மைண்டில் வந்தது இப்போ present situation in Kerala. So a couple of months back when I was actually talking with my brother or conversation on this topic on what has happened in Chennai, எப்படி ரூல்ஸ் எல்லாம் ஃப்ளவுட் பண்ணுறாங்க, பில்டிங்ஸ் எல்லா வாட்டர் பாடிஸ் எல்லாம் நிறையா டெஸ்ட்ராய்டு இன்னைக்கு இல்லை, அண்ட் இது வாட்டர் சேனல்ஸ் எல்லாம் க்ளோஸ் பண்ணிவிட்டு நிறைய ஹைரைஸ் பில்டிங்ஸ், ஒரே கான்க்ரீட் ஜங்கிள், and we don't learn from our mistakes. இதெல்லாம் பார்த்து I was just cribbing and was talking with my brother. அவன் சொன்ன ஒரு ஸ்டேட்மெண்ட் he half jokingly said that, பட் அதோட இது இப்போ இமீடியட்டாக within a month கேரளாவில் பார்க்கும்போது I thought he was very right, because he said நீ ஃபுல் கிரெடிட் தமிழ்நாடுக்கு அதுக்கு எடுத்துக்கணும்னு பார்க்காத. பெங்களூர், he lives in Bangalore. He said பெங்களூரில் இதே ஒரு சுச்சுவேஷன் வந்ததுனாக்க என்டையர் பெங்களூர் will be wiped off. ஏன்னா அவ்வளோ கேவலமாக இருக்குது பெங்களூர்லேயும் இந்த as far as the compliance with laws are concerned. So it will be even worse in Bangalore is what he said. So இன்னைக்கு Kerala we are seeing the same actually. So what environmentalists are saying now is that this Kerala disaster, they have pointed out fingers stating that extensive quarrying, mushrooming of high rises and illegal forest land acquisition by private parties are the major reasons for the calamity. And as early as in 2011, the Kerala government had rejected Kargil Committee's recommendations to classify a stretch of Western Ghats as ecologically sensitive zone, impose strong restrictions on quarrying, and to protect resources with cooperation of local self-governments and people. So this is another. They don't want to listen. So ellame they talk about, they say it's for development. Development அப்படின்னா டெவலப்மெண்ட் யாருக்காக, எதுக்காக, எப்படி, all these are questions which they don't want to, the government doesn't want to consider, and where are we heading is a very big question. So in this public talk, the speakers will touch upon the relationships between urban and rural land use and environment, and discuss how recent initiatives will increase the fragility of the city in terms of food security, poverty alleviation, livelihoods, and climate resilience. This open conversation seeks to engage social and environmental activists and researchers who work on initiatives to clean our lakes and beaches, that promote urban greenery and organic farming, contest evictions of low-income housing, and prevent loss of coastal and common lands. So with this, I welcome you all once again for this talk, and we take privilege in inviting our speakers onto the stage, please. Mr. Rajagopal PV, Ms. Bhuneshwari Raman, and Ms. Priti Narayan. Briefly introduce all the three speakers, and at Kapram we will leave the stage to them, and we will hear them. So Mr. Rajagopal PV is a Gandhian activist, and he was the former vice chairman of Gandhi Peace Foundation. He studied agriculture at Sevagram in Wardha. Before his work with Ekta Parishad, he helped rehabilitate dacoits in violence-ridden areas of Chambal in Madhya Pradesh. He soon started traveling to various tribal areas, understanding the needs and plight of marginalized tribals all over India. After mobilizing and training many people, he set up Ekta Parishad in 1991. Ekta Parishad works to restore people's control over livelihood resources in environments where land is being grabbed and forest rights are not being implemented. This further fit into his Gandhian vision of self-reliant communities and local governance. Ekta Parishad's large campaign in 2007, the Janadesh, was the largest non-violent action in history. Ekta Parishad is a people's movement and is comprised of people at the grassroots level. It is a federation of approximately 11,000 community-based organizations with thousands of individual members. Ekta Parishad is Gandhian in nature, working via the principles of Satyagraha and Ahimsa to organize collective non-violence campaigns that act as a counterforce to the social, institutional, and physical violence faced by India's poorest communities. We take great pleasure in welcoming you, sir. Thank you very much for being with us today. Professor Bhuneshwari Raman is a professor at the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, Jindal Global University. Ms. Raman's research focuses on urbanization, governance, and poverty in South Asian countries. She has researched and written on urban transformation, real estate dynamics, and the politics of urban development, informality, poverty, and urban governance. She received her PhD in social policy from the London School of Economics in 2010. Her recent research focuses on transnational urbanism in India and China and land transformation in Indian metros and small towns. She has consulted for international organizations including the World Bank, UNCHS, and UNESCO. She has published in national and international journals such as the Economic and Political Weekly, Journal of South Asian Development, and the Monday Journal of International Development and Critical Planning. Thank you, madam, for being with us today. We welcome you. We would like to invite Priti Narayanan, who is an activist researcher studying land rights for the urban poor in Chennai. Her work is in the intersection of slum policy, local politics, and bureaucracy, focusing on how the urban poor makes claims to tenure security and basic services in the absence of tenure security. She has a master's degree from Columbia University and a year's experience as a journalist with The Hindu. Previously, she headed the Slum and Informal Settlements research team at Transparent Chennai, an action research group creating maps, data, and research on neglected issues concerning the urban poor. She is currently a PhD student in geography at Rutgers University in the US, teaching classes on South Asia and cities while she writes her dissertation, and is a member of the Pennurime Yekkam, a 40-year slum rights movement in Chennai. Welcome, Preeti. Thank you for joining us. Thank you all. Now the stage is all yours. Maybe, sir, you can start with your...
Hi, my name is Preeti. I'm actually really thrilled to be here, and I don't say this perfunctorily. PV Rajagopal Ayya has been working with the Unorganized Workers Federation. Last year, we conducted a survey of released bonded laborers across 7 districts in Tamil Nadu and Puducherry, and these were families that were literally released from slavery by and we heard a lot of stories, and I met him for the first time today. Bhuvaneshwari Raman, as I was telling her earlier, I'm a huge fan of, so I'm just glad to be here. What I thought I would do today is maybe talk through like a Cliff Notes version of the history of urban land rights in Chennai, stuff that we've been talking about for a while, and maybe locate opportunities for resilience in the face of, natural disaster, food insecurity, broadly, and livelihood precarity. I guess the first thing to establish is that the question of land is connected to labor in the urban setting, right? Like populations have congregated where they have been able to access livelihood opportunities in the city as well as access to basic services. It's why people live close to ports and other kind of sources of livelihood in the city. And scholars have talked about how, especially in kind of post-independence India, the fact that the poor were allowed to stay where they chose to make their, where they chose to settle down itself was a form of public welfare. And it is this kind of nature of public welfare that is transformed dramatically over time. And we can talk about how. And I think the case of Chennai is particularly interesting because because slum settlements have been really closely connected to what we often disparagingly called vote bank politics, right? Tenements for the poor were built where they already lived, and the setting of the slum board itself was a way for politicians to cater to particular kind of constituencies and say, let me give you housing where you already live, and in exchange you can vote for me, was kind of the broad logic of the slum clearance board itself when it was set up in the early 1970s. We see smiles, in the smiles of the urban poor we see God, right, was kind of the catchphrase. And it's interesting also that the first ever slum legislation was perhaps in Tamil Nadu. The Tamil Nadu Slums Act was perhaps the first legislation that had to do specifically with intervention into slums. And the slum board also was the first of its kind that was set up in 1971. And so Tamil Nadu was actually a really kind of progressive space where housing for slums was concerned. And I think the Tamil Nadu Slums Act is one that we refer to even today, in that it set out what seems like quite a clear procedure for intervention into slums, right? You identify slums and then you officially recognize them before you intervene in the slum in whatever form. And as a result of the passing of the act, about 1,200 slums, roughly 1,202 slums were declared in 1971, followed by about 17 slums that were added to the list in 1984. Right, so we're talking about a really measly 1,220 slums that have been declared ever in the history of Chennai. What does this mean, right? I remember the chief urban planner of the CMDA at the time, Mr. Dattatri, once told us that every single slum that had been declared had been improved in some way, right? And it had been improved through what we now know as the Madras Urban Development Projects, right? That every single one of the declared slums in the 70s and the 80s was indeed improved. And it's interesting that this intervention happened through the entry of the World Bank into urban policy, right? And Chennai was one of the first testing grounds of World Bank's interventions into housing worldwide. Chennai was among the first places where it happened, and I think it was really the forerunner to the entry of foreign capital and generally international intervention into urban development itself, which is interesting, and it's interesting that they chose to do it in housing. And the World Bank's entry was really one that was welcomed, right? Because, the TNSCB was strapped for funds. They were not working at their most efficient. So the World Bank's entry was seen as something that was quite welcome at the time, right? But what the World Bank did in turn is also kind of set up this model of what we know as the model of contemporary urban development, right? Which is a depoliticized, right, free of political interference, kind of a kind of an intervention into the urban space, where, you know, broadly we could say that there were kind of three kinds of housing interventions spearheaded by the World Bank. The first of which is what we call the sites and services scheme, where they would develop these huge tracts of land in the peripheries and offer basic services and invite people to be a part of these schemes and say, here's an opportunity for you to own a home. Here's how you can sign up, right? And it was a very kind of clear route to some amount of tenure security for the poor through this scheme. The second one was called, was kind of an in situ slum improvement scheme, where slums were improved where they already were and given or assured some amount of tenure security at the end of a certain amount of time, which we can talk about at in some detail a little later. And of course, the tenements, right? All the tenements that you see in the central city area of Chennai, some of which were built by the TNSCB and others had some amount of World Bank involvement in this. And it's a very kind of a warped version of that we see in slum intervention today, right? In the form of forceful eviction of central city slum areas and their resettlement in the peripheries is really the TNSCB learning very select lessons from the World Bank's intervention by identifying huge tracts of land in the peripheries where the poor will now live, but there being no offer of choice, right? That the eviction is indeed a forceful one. And it's not an opting into home ownership, much more a kind of forfeiting of land within the city to be able to own an apartment in the peripheries. Whether you really own the apartment is also an interesting question, because I mean, one thing that the Slums Act didn't do is establish any kind of clear route to tenure security. Does the Act say that the poor can lawfully own land in the city? Does this legislation offer that? The answer is no. Right? There never has existed, and this is kind of the basic truth, right? There never has existed a kind of clear route to tenure security for urban poor families who have occupied land in the city. In 1979, I think there was a GO that was passed that said that slum residents could apply for what was called a conditional patta, right? You would receive a hire purchase agreement, and upon payment of certain dues over a long period of time, you would get a patta for the land that you occupied. And earlier, as of 2007, you know that only 25% of those who benefited from the MUDP schemes ever got a sale deed, right? This kind of transformation of the right to occupy land and associated benefits, translating into a form of tenure security, like a documentary form of tenure security, like sale deeds, what actually happened to very few families in the city. 25% of MUDP beneficiaries, only about 14% of the people that have lived in tenements in Chennai have ever reached the stage of actually getting a sale deed. What does a sale deed mean? It means it gives you the power to legally participate in market mechanisms to sell your land, to sell your apartment or house, or be able to mortgage it. And obtain a loan or whatever, right? But this has happened to so few families in Chennai, and this kind of continues to be the same because today, when slum families are resettled, they are given very similar documents, the hire purchase documents, where you pay a certain amount of dues for a long period of time before you actually own the apartment. But people don't pay dues. Cost recovery is really poor because the apartment is in such poor shape. It's falling on your head. Access to services is really poor. People lose really crucial ties to livelihood opportunities and networks, other social networks, educational opportunities, whatnot, through this move to the peripheries. And so none of the hire purchase documents actually translate to owning right? So this is the kind of grand illusion under which the urban poor operate today, right? That they're forcefully evicted from the city in the promise of owning your own house, but that actually really doesn't happen because of how long it takes, what happens in the meanwhile, which we'll hopefully I'll be able to get to at some point. But also, yeah, and then I think also to be able to understand the story of evictions in Chennai today, why is there eviction at all, right? That there has been from the 1980s an increasing kind of commodification of land. Land has become so precious for all kinds of urban development, right? There's investments coming from across the globe. Bhuvaneshwari would be able to talk about that much better than me, but also investments from across the globe finding their way into the Indian urban space, taking over of lands in the name of urban development, right, as a way to develop infrastructure. But what this has done is it uses legislation that was initially set up by the British, right, to be able to acquire land. The Land Acquisition Act of 1907 is still the one that's invoked today to be able to take over land, right? And we should talk about what the ramifications are. And also a really huge paradigm shift in how public interest, this idea of public interest is defined for development for home, right? And what does it mean to take over this land in the name of public interest? Who does that impact, and how? Are questions that we talk about. And all of this happens through this idea of calculated informality, what Ananya Roy calls calculated informality, right? Which is a kind of willful, deliberate flouting of neglect of existing rules and policy to enable that kind of development to happen. In simple words, it would mean that the government is violating its own rules in order to enable this kind of urban development, right? And that could take so many forms. It takes the form of the flouting of building code or other kinds of regulation that doesn't allow people to build certain kinds of buildings and in particular locations. And the discourse around the floods in Chennai has really, I think we finally gotten to that point where everyone's talking about how it was indeed middle class and elite greed that drowned the city, right? Through unlawful real estate development on its water bodies and so forth, allowed, willfully, deliberately allowed by the government, that really kind of drowned the city, right? But we can also see this particularly in slum policy. Slums had to be declared, to be intervened in, and so large numbers of slums have been left undeclared, right? And when you're in this giant kind of legal gray area where you've not been declared, then the government sees fit to kind of step in and do whatever they want, wipe you off the face of the city overnight because you're not protected by anything legally. Often, interviews with retired slum board officials, and I think it's important to mark that, have revealed that often evictions happen and then GOs are passed after, right? So we see this kind of willful, deliberate twisting and bending of rules to enable this kind of takeover of land to happen. The idea of what an objectionable slum is also one that's interesting, in that earlier it was kind of broadly defined as all slums that were on road, rail, and river margins. But now the government says, oh, objectionable also means if it's on any land that we want, right? And now every piece of land in the city is wanted, is desired for development in these ways. So I guess broadly one could say that the logic of urban lands being kind of intrinsically connected to questions of labor and livelihood and use value, what we know is use value, right? Using the land for social reproduction, to be able to live your lives, to run your own industries, to be able to survive, has completely flipped. Now land is only looked at as for its exchange value. What is it worth in the market? Whom can it go to for the maximum milking of its potential, right? Very specific kind of potential. So Naomi Klein calls coined this term disaster capitalism, right? Which is kind of an exploitative economy logic that finds its way into disaster affected areas. What is happening in Chennai is kind of a form of disaster capitalism, a kind of disaster gentrification, one could say, right? Of swooping into communities when they have recently been devastated by something and offering alternate housing in the peripheries in the form of flood relief, but really the disaster relief project only being a continuation of the ongoing development project, which involves the takeover of land. And the disaster is really just a ripe opportunity for this kind of intervention into slums. I guess, I mean, I'm hoping that this kind of broadly summarizes questions of land rights in the city, and then, you know, we talked really briefly about what needs to be done. You know, these things are not simple, but, you know, one could broadly say that slums really are geographically determined, right? People live where they live because it's convenient, because they can access these things that they may not otherwise lawfully get by being in those locations. Particularly livelihood opportunities within the central city, especially for those in the informal sector, and access to basic services, right? And you cannot remove them from the central city. So does that mean you improve them in situ, where the slums already are? It's interesting because declared slums take up less than 2% of the city's land, and undeclared slums take up about 1% of the city's land. That's the proportion of land that slums occupy in the central city. Yet, we find so much reluctance on the part of the government to do anything about or delivering these slums some kind of right to their land. And for flood areas, this is a question that people really like to ask. But they get flooded every year, or they get flooded in the event of a huge disaster. Do you mean that they still need to live where they already do? Well, there have been creative solutions from across the world around the Guarapiranga Reservoir in Brazil, for instance, where they have sought some kind of creative solutions for slums to remain along water bodies while protecting them from flooding, but also just that resettlement could well take the form of resettlement within the city, right? And this can only happen through kind of a vacant land mapping exercise, which in turn really the government has the resources to do, but hasn't done. And I think the question of getting a patta, really does tenure security have to take the form? We do ask for patta, right? Because patta is really a guarantee of some kind of tenure security to the poor, but what does the patta really mean, right? If the patta is really going to be a document that is valid in the market for, you know, lawful exchange, can the poor be bought out easily? In case everyone's given a patta, does it mean that then, you know, in that they could lose their land by being bought off? Is a question that I've been thinking about. It's not an easy one to answer, right? But also broadly, if we can think of tenure security as a way to think of right to the land that can take the form of a patta or not, or can take other forms and offer some kind of tenure security that protects some amount of land from the market, so that people that cannot afford to partake in market exchange can continue to use the land, is something that we can think about. And then I'm just going to quickly wrap up about questions of resilience, right? How we see resilience and what the opportunities are for resilience. We see it everywhere, right? Less than 50% of the people that were given homes in Kannagi Nagar continue to live there. Meaning people are forcefully evicted, they get these houses, but then they leave the houses and move back to the city because really living in a resettlement colony is not a viable option anymore, right? From the 1970s, we've had government agencies set out to create like slum-free cities, but it's never going to happen for precisely these reasons. If this is the model of getting rid of slums, right? And also to think of the city really as a place or a space of appropriation, right? The poor take over land that is unused, and then the government tries to take over that land for development purposes. And then to complete that chain, perhaps, we need to continue. Resilience is most evident in how appropriation happens in the city, right? This ongoing takeover and expansion of slums in the city, and ongoing appropriation of unused land in the city is resilience, right? This is what it looks like, especially in the absence of legal ways to own land in the city. And I'm also really curious about the relationship between electoral politics and slum rights, especially in Chennai. Right? We've talked about what a close relationship local politicians have with their vote banks, in a sense, right? Promises made to you, you vote for me, and how this paradigm of vote bank politics has changed. Right? One could say that it has changed through the distribution of mixies and grinders and TVs and cycles and so forth. Right? It doesn't take the form of rights to the land anymore, right? But I keep thinking about how, if you send thousands of families to the peripheries, then who's voting or who's going to vote? What is the kind of give and take of what are the losses and the benefits of this model? Right? And what is the bearing that it has on electoral politics? I'm convinced that it does have a bearing on electoral politics. I know from Pennurumayakkam's experience that in Badrikare, for instance, people voted out a councillor who was threatening to evict them. An MLA, exactly, right? Who was threatening to evict them. So the electoral system, the electoral politics is still a thriving area where you could see the agency of urban residents quite clearly, and I wonder how we can how we can ensure that this power is indeed exercised. I mean, there have been no local body elections in Chennai for over 2 years, right? And I keep wondering what the relationship between urban residents and councillors is in the face of this. But also just more broadly, from the works of like Solomon Benjamin and Bhuvaneshwari and Partha Chatterjee more broadly, like what are some of the ways of claims making that are available to the poor that don't have to do with formal landowning logics at all, right? That have to do with often negotiations, informal negotiations with bureaucrats that are unpredictable, intricate, but that really matter and that really affect the neoliberal project, right? We could think of things like, huge projects like the JNNURM kind of having their way with the city and, and of not being participatory in these ways, right? That the poor really don't have a space to determine what happens to the city, and this is broadly true. It's why forceful resettlement happens. But despite that, and we see it at the scale of the nation, and we should be able to see it at the scale of the local, how groups get together and exert pressure. It could be in the name of caste groups, it could be in the name of other organizations who are able to exert power on the neoliberal projects and prevent things from happening. An easy example would be kind of energy subsidies, right? That don't have any, that don't add up logically in the face of cost recovery and all the other things the neoliberal project stands for, but are still alive and thriving. And I think resilience is really about taking advantage of these relationships and of the ways in which informally, if our formal spaces for making claims are closed, then how can we take over, and I'm using the word appropriation again, take over power in these spaces of the informal and the unpredictable. I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me today, and also thanks to Preeti and Rajagopal. What I will be doing today is sharing a few findings based on my research. And I'm also particularly happy to share it in Chennai because this is a research based on Chennai's outer outlying areas, and particularly Sriperumbudur, Oragadam and ECR area, all of which are touted as the new spaces of capital in Chennai. And in a sense, I'm coming from another angle to the same argument forwarded by Preeti. It is in terms of how is this project of appropriation of land facilitated using institutions, laws, and also setting up a playing ground that is highly favorable for large developers. Now, before moving into things, cities are constantly changing, and as we are sitting here and talking, there is transformation going on. And all this project, land is intricately implicated in this transformation, and to a certain extent, that the use value and exchange value at one level, it becomes important for everyone. For a small trader who's located in T Nagar, operating with a kiosk of 10 by 10, that particular space becomes critical, not only for attracting, not only in terms of the location, because there's a congregation here, you can access a clientele, and it's possible in a space like T Nagar to get into various forms of tenure, like owning, sharing, occupation. But it's also critical because that's location and locality play a role in mobilizing the finance. So it's not only about title to land, it's also about location, locality, and where you do it. And essentially in that case, one thing that becomes very, very critical is that if land is implicated in wealth, and that is not only in terms of how economic activities are enacted on this land as a stage, but it's also embedded within land itself. And land is much more than an economic asset. It's linked to your social relations, it's linked to your identity and memory, and therefore it makes it a much more contested and politicized space to deal with. It is in this context what becomes critical is that how is this transformation directed, particularly since the state controls all territory, even though we may be sitting in a private ownership thing. The very meaning of eminent domain that they keep evoking in every eviction is that underlying context is that all land belongs to territory, and I can use eminent domain and public interest at any time to take over the land, irrespective of whether you have title or don't have title. And the second thing one has to understand in the Indian context is none of us have title per se, as we understand in the Western context. What we have is evidence of title, and that makes it even more it strengthens the claims of eminent domain. So particularly one question is, it is in these broader legal contexts, how do you direct transformation, and particularly how do you redistribute land and thereby the surplus that is generated via land, either via economic activities or via the real estate gains that's happening. And what I'm going to show in this I'm going to start the lecture with a few slides, which is essentially showing the patterns of development in one of the outlying area in Chennai. It's the Sri Perumbudur Oragadam area, which is touted as the India's Shanghai. India's Shanghai, this was supposed to be India's Shanghai, and also, as all of you know, this is also the space where the government of Tamil Nadu, together with the central government, came up with a series of projects which includes your special economic zone, economic corridor projects, and industrial corridors, most of which are targeted towards real estate development. See, transformation has always happened. She talked about the series of Chennai is a laboratory of World Bank projects, and there have been a series of urban development projects starting from 1970s till now. What really distinguishes the type of transformation that is happening now to the ones that happened earlier? It is the very explicit real estate-led urban development, whether it's the financial logic or it's the institutional logic. It is who captures. It is the greed to capture the land value gains became central, whether you think of the state or you think of the large developer, and that is what is driving much of the projects. And as you will see in the screen, the forms of the development that is happening on the ground. Yeah. Basically, the patterns of land development that you find along this area are township projects, gated communities, and luxury housing complexes. And essentially, much of the land outside the village have been taken over either under the SEZ projects or under the guise of these projects and reallocated to the large developers. You have these 5 major developers operate in these areas. Most of them have connections to the international stock market and international and national capital market. and none of the projects is less than 100 acres. So the question that this becomes critical is that aggregating land is a very tricky thing, because if you look at the land ownership pattern, most of the farmers there own, majority of the farmers there own between 2 to 5 acres, and it is in this context, if you can imagine the number of farmers that they have to negotiate, one can understand the magnitude of the issue. If so, how do these large developers aggregate land? For them, aggregating land becomes either they rely completely on the state, and it is in this reliance of the state, they rely completely on the state, and also there are two ways in which they do it. One is via the Land Acquisition Act, where land is acquired and allocated to the developer. A classic example is the Mahindra project, where the land was SEZ rules were also changed. Although the Special Economic Zone Act initially started for setting up economic enterprises which are export oriented, within that setting, the developers got it changed by 2009-10 to include 40% of the land for housing, and now it has become 60% for real estate development, predominantly housing, and 40% for all your economic enterprises. So the lobbies have also for continuously changing what an SEZ is meant for, and how land within the SEZ can be used. And DLF got its land in the Mahindra city, and if you go to Sri Perumbudur Oragadam region, Inno Global, ETA Star, most of them have got it through SEZ, and the other ways in which they get the land is through your public-private partnership. And particularly, the classic example is, if you go on the Sri Perumbudur main road, you will see something like ETA Global Township, and this is a partnership project of the government of Tamil Nadu and the developer located in Dubai, but with connections in Tamil Nadu. Now, the logic by which all these projects are sold is that we need foreign direct investment. Without foreign direct investments, we cannot thrive, and all of these people are going to bring in the foreign direct investment. So the government gets into these projects on the condition, onto this partnership on the condition, we give you land for free. We also see, for example, in ETA Star, it's a 99-year lease, and then we also give you clearances. We take the risk of of ensuring that your project doesn't enter into any bottleneck. Now, when you talk about both of these are problematic, whether it's the PPP project or the land acquisition project, the scale of these projects necessitate you acquire more and more land. Because you also need to understand the way large developers make their surplus is, I control the land in time X and then I build it 30 years then on in order to reap the land value capture, because I build the setting in terms of the image, in terms of the level of infrastructure that I lobby and get it from the state. It is over these 30 years, if I have to hold the land, one thing that becomes very, very critical is the policy of holding land bank. So if you go to Sri Perumbudur Oragadam and that entire region or the ECR region, lot of the land is taken from agriculture and they are simply with the land bank, essentially waiting to be developed. And the issue with land bank is that it allows for control by one or two developers. A classic example is Gurgaon. When the DLF failed, I kind of very naively asked one of the the financial planner team of Ernst & Young, is that so that the DLF life is over? And they said, no way, they control 8,000 acres. For the next 30 years, there's no way any developer can enter in, not even the major developer. Then you can think of the small players. And if you think of the REITs, for example, the Real Estate Investment Trust that is coming in, and if you closely watch the rules that is there in Real Estate Investment Trust, it is precisely to move out the small and the medium developers. Because often the logic that is given is that somehow your so-called informal developer and the small developer and the medium developer are riffraffs, and these are the guys who are going to cheat you. And here comes Hiranandani and the DLF who's going to give you your product on table and without it. You go to Sri Perumbudur, Hiranandani's project is caught. And it's caught simply because it was implicated in the HSBC scandal in 2005 over precisely how they used foreign direct investment. And secondly, you go to any of these major developer projects, not more than 20 to 30% occupancy is there. Now, all of these become important at two levels. At one level, you're promoting a pattern of development that is largely township, largely gated housing complex, and the very idea of DLF coming in, Hiranandani comes in, it shoots up. This is Hiranandani, which took up most of the village, and that is the village in front, and that is the estate in front. But the land to the left, right, including the water body, Hiranandani claims it's part of the land bank. And along this road, I have few other pictures. This is Temple Green, Arunexalo, which keeps going on and on with its township. It's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, including, it is all in Sri Perambuduru Oragadam on the southwest frontier. And not even its first phase is over. This is the ETA Star, which is the Dubai-based capital, which oriented itself for the Korean expats who are staying there. So your entire city is planned not for the people who live there, but for the expats and from the Korean expats and the NRI capital that's going to come in and fill this real estate capital. Now, this is also the project which I was mentioning in, where government of Tamil Nadu went in as a partner with the ETA, and land was donated by government of Tamil Nadu. Slide. This is again Arunexalu. If you can go to the next slide, there's a table there. I give you the table. These are the major players who are operating this entire area. And if you can see the scale of the project, if you take Global, it is a GeoCity township. It's about 131 acres. And they claim that they purchased land. But basically the land that they claimed purchased was a college, which was already aggregated. And therefore, if you know the educational political economy in the state, not only in Tamil Nadu and elsewhere, it's very much at the senior party circuit. And therefore, much of the negotiation happened very closed door, and nobody knew there was even a college there. And if you take the Global Township, it's again a public-private partnership. And Arun Exalo is a local person, but he keeps incrementally investing in this area for more than 10 years, and it's now that he's developing it. And you take Lanker. Lanker is a Belgium-based group who kind of purchase land partly directly from the thing, and partly they source it via government schemes. Now the reason they all become also important is, if you look at the capital mobilization, all of them are listed both in Nifty and they are listed in international capital. And the way it works is, your FDI that comes in, nobody sees it. Nobody sees it in a foreign capital. When take over once they want to leave the country is difficult. Often this FDI is shown as not even as a collateral, as a base to raise local capital. And if you all know, the non-performing assets of our own banks are shaky. Canara Bank can collapse because of TVH. So if you look at each of these projects and the loans that they are implicated in, they are not only affecting people whose land is taken, they are also affecting a larger public. And the larger group includes a range of poor to the lower middle to the middle class. Despite so, and that's it. And despite this fact that these kind of projects keep going on, and it's also perpetuating the two feet. The another interesting thing is that who are the institutional players who are driving it. Earlier we know, if you take the slum eviction, it's a Tamil Nadu Slum Clearance Board, therefore we can target Tamil Nadu Slum Clearance Board and fight it. But if you look at a lot of these projects, many things are invisible. Who really drives these capital market and bond floating? It's your Ernst & Young, and then your Arup Architects. It's the alliance of architects, it's alliance of lawyers, and also your particularly financial consultancies, like your Blackstone is another major one. CBRL, you don't even know, they play not only here, they play in CBRL slides up here, same way in Hong Kong and in China. So it's not one country they are playing. When they do these things, it's like none of us know that they have written these documents and they have written it. What is much more critical, what started in the World Bank era, which Preeti talked about, is the way they reconfigured institutions. If the World Bank reconfigured CMDA from Metropolitan Development Authority to a project support unit to a Tamil Nadu Urban Development Project, and then separate the finance out of it into two FIG, It is there they place the control. It is via finance that both the central government, the regional government, and the consultants play it. And therefore, when what you see, and the use of eminent domain. So if you see it, the way land gets appropriated is also getting much more subtle, even though the projects that they promote is highly risky. And it is in this context, when it comes particularly to Tamil Nadu, one of the narrative that comes in is about the land. Why do farmers give the land? And if you see some of the articles that's coming is, yes, farmers gave up the land voluntarily because compensation is very high, because there is no agriculture. It's true. If yes, it is, these are all dry land, these are all dependent on certain irrigation facility and a rain-fed irrigation. But if you go into these villages and speak to them, it is the willful destruction of irrigation facility, it's the willful destruction of the tanks and the lakes that fed in was what pushed these people in a corner. Because if you look at the even Geeta Ma'am's organization know about it, there was an inter 10 village alliance to fight land acquisition way back in 2005 to 2010. And the reason, and if you go and speak to the alliance itself, one of the person who was leading the alliance himself was a local DMK chairman. And the reason he got into it is simply because when I talked to him, he said that the K-based party, which once used to be, yes, this, we cannot forget the history of DMK in this place. Its root in Justice Party, its root in the anti-Brahmin movement, and the way it supported small entrepreneurs at one time. But somehow there was a tectonic shift in the way these parties were organized. Now, particularly when the Singara Chennai project came in 2005, the way the parties were negotiating was simply calling the cadres and say, now take it or leave it. And that this was mapped with violence. So two constituencies which are very much used to negotiating within cadre, this is a new situation that they had to do it. So the alliance itself, which went into protest and which it took a court case, a court case, was also out of no way. No other option that is available. If they are giving up land, it's like playing a chess with your hands tied, and the rules are completely loaded again in favor of large developers and the state, and the other rules are such that you can only move your king. You cannot move anything with all the coins in front. You're pretty much, yes, you have the armor, you have the political thing, but you can't do anything the way the institutions get played. And particularly in the Sri Perumbudur Oragadam case, and this happens everywhere throughout India, is once you go to the court takes this fantastic position, we only interpret the law. And therefore, what is the law? The eminent domain becomes the context of the law. And therefore, I cannot contest that my land is being acquired. What I can have to go and plead is only, can I be given more compensation? And you trace this to the new land acquisition law. They made it much more blatant. You don't question why I am taking your land. Okay, you want more compensation? I'll give you more compensation. The question is not only compensation. If you go to the same Oragadam village, and if you go to one of the tanks that is there in the village, under the new regime of CR company, corporate social responsibility, almost all the tanks maintenance and management was given to this, and this particular tank is handled by Hyundai. So basically they fenced everything. There were people, because in any tank there will be overflow, and the overflow region, which is the tank bund, are also spaces where certain people were dependent on for cultivation, particularly survival cultivation. There's a large number of families most of whom lost their land on the Panchami land also, and are landless, or caught in this situation. If you talk about this compensation story, the compensation story works only for large farmers who own 15 acres. Even if you go and analyze the use of the compensation amount with farmers who have 5 acres or less, it doesn't make any sense for them. The reason they joined the protest in the first place is because land made more sense for them in terms of livelihood, rather than taking a compensation and getting out of the scene. And basically what also makes negotiating with the state difficult is that, interestingly, you had a CMDA, and if you go to, and in parallel in Sri Perumbudur you had a town planning authority. Now when the acquisition came in, everything was announced. It included the villages, it included layouts which had planning permission and which had one layer of permission. It included all shades of legality, and the basic assumption is take the compensation, this is public interest. And often, and when they use an emergency clause, which is what is problematic. You use eminent domain, you use public interest, and then you say emergency. We are not in a warlike situation to evict each and every land using such stringent legal clauses that you have absolutely no way to negotiate with the institution. The second thing is, where are these projects located? The project, if you go to this place, Oragadam, and it's an SEZ project, and the SEZ project set in process a whole load of things, and you go, who is responsible for SEZ? It's the Tamil Nadu Small Scale Industrial Development Corporation, and within the Tamil Nadu Small Scale Industrial Development, they have morphed into 3 different institutions, and one of which is a public sector private company limited. It's a private company. It's registered under the Private Company Acts. So basically, it has representation from the government, but it also has representation just like Tufik from the financial officers, and it is them who got into partnership, because as any parastatal can no longer get into direct partnership with any private developer. So what you also suddenly find is that, what do we mean by the state? Every time we talk about the state, and who are we contesting it? So perhaps the third point that I want to lay out is about the right to the city. The right to the city argument, when Lefebvre started it, it's a much larger argument. It is about the right to different neighborhoods, right to history of the city, right to mobility, right to moving between all the cities. But somehow this got reduced into right to a land, right to a particular, and Tamil Nadu Slum Clearance Board further reduces it to right to some built unit somewhere in the city. And therefore, every time evictions get justified. It's also surprising to see how institutions that were once very progressive, like the community development, there used to be a community development wing within the Tamil Nadu Slum Clearance Board, the role that they played in 1990s in mobilizing communities to bargain with Slum Clearance Board officials on either issues of water or issues of land regularization and land adjustment, was completely over in that era. In 2012, when we met that community development wing head, the thing that she said is, she was preparing a biometric card. She said, oh, we need this biometric card because all slum dwellers are cheaters. We need this card so that they won't get more than one house. Then the second thing is about, we are educating them. We are educating them how to deal with a decent life. But what is it? Is it that it reminds you, it takes you back to the Savage days, and somehow the people have to come. These are the natives who have to be civilized and moved up. And they were very, very particular, and at that time, even as much as 2012, they had 5 or 6 sites identified for further relocation. Now, what does this relocation do, and what does this kind of land acquisition do? And particularly developments like gated housing, luxury housing, it affects in 2 ways. One is the landholders, who are largely the rural poor, the people who are dependent on livelihoods, who are pushed into further vulnerable position, simply because, and on the other end, if you take the way cities developed earlier, people, including your poor group, when they are moving up, they will try and invest a small plot on the outskirts. It will be a plot probably in an unorganized thing, and then they will get it regularized. They will build it incrementally. You're foreclosing an opportunity for them to access land, both within the city and outside the city. The second issue is with one is the livelihood, second is the foreclosing of opportunities. Third, the projects like relocation, like what she said, a lot of them, and most of them come from Satyanagar, where Geeta ma'am is working. Most of them are traders in Paris, and most of them kind of come here as a weekend house because they simply cannot manage the time cycle of their trade, and the idea of what their housing needs are completely at loggerheads. The link between work and housing is somehow forgotten in this whole thing. housing gets reduced to some 4 walls with inadequate floor area. And that brings us to the last point which I want to lay down. Projects like JNURRM, RAY, or much more the smart cities. Earlier they had something called a slum clearance board and there was some idea of tenement. With JNURRM, even that got wiped out. They were very clear that all the funds, 60% of the fund was allocated for mega infrastructure projects and the 40% for people who are displaced from these projects. There was no idea of creating any additional housing stock for various income groups, number one. And number two, when it came to smart city, it takes it at a higher level. It's a crass real estate development project. For example, their idea of developing Tinagar is a mall with a multi-purpose parking space right in the middle of Ranganathan Street. Now, the aesthetics also plays a politics. So probably what we also need to do is, we need to think of political strategies which are much more than protest and movement. We also have to think of how are we going to deal with the institutional strategies, because they are constantly playing by creating new institutions, constantly creating new rules, and then you are as an affected party trying to play within the framework that they have already laid, number one. And number two, a lot of it is also linked to the knowledge production. Spaces Land Acquisition Act, the buttresses, the reinforcement for it came from institutions like the IIM, like the Indian Economic Institution. It's like Arvind Panagaria was a classic thing for title. Whose title, what title, and how does it affect? All of this get washed out. And what washes out? It is this economic concept of how we understand efficiency of land, productivity of land. Is efficiency and productivity of land is ultimately linked to an assumed surplus generation that the large developer is going to give and a growth, whereas what we see is a highly risky project which can pull all of us, not just the poor in the city. So probably with this I stop and we take it up for discussion.
So I think you had enough for this evening. Right. More will be too much. Good. So I'm very happy that I came today. Not because I'm going to speak, because happy to listen to Preeti and Bhuvana. Because I come from a situation where we feel this urban people know nothing about land problem. We always entertain this feeling that these are people who don't know anything about our problem. So I am very struck by what Preeti and Bhuvana said today, and you should repeat it every day in every conference, Bhuvana. This is something which people need to understand. It's a serious issue. It's a very serious issue. So when I came with the idea that I will give you some information. Sorry for my throat, voice. I came with some information. One, there is a yatra of women that started day for yesterday from Toronto. This is called Women and Land Yatra. Women Bhumi Samvad Yatra. Women are on the road speaking about their identity in relation to land. You remember there is a private member bill of M.S. Swaminathan in the parliament asking that women should also be recognized as farmers. Right? So this yatra will be on the road for the next 45 days. Please see where you can join. Geeta Ben was telling me that she will be happy to welcome them to Chennai. They are not coming to Chennai, but they will be in Tamil Nadu for a week, then through 11 states before they go to join a much bigger yatra to Delhi. So there is one action that is going on now. Women on the road telling that please recognize us as farmers. It's almost like saying that in a changing demography where 80% men are out earning something in the cities, women are doing much of the work on the farm. But when they go to the bank manager will say, bring the man to sign the document, you know. It's almost like, I don't recognize you as a farmer. He is the farmer. Because the land is in his name. So women are not even recognized as farmers. Right? So this is a serious issue, leave alone. Other issues are there. I mean, if there is a divorce, who will get the land? Now recently in the Ministry of Rural Development, when we had a discussion, Mr. Meena, the secretary, was telling, look, in my village it is a practice that we get women to sign the land in the name of their brothers. It's a gift. They have to make this gift because they want to live in the family. Without making a gift, you can't live in the family. So, it's a serious matter. So please take notice of this yatra and see how we can support them with this yatra. Can women's voice be heard by people sitting in Delhi? The Rural Development Ministry, the Land Resource Department. The Land Resource Department is very keen to help us, but the voice need to come from bottom. That is why the yatra is organized. The second information is about a big yatra, 25,000 people marching to Delhi on 2nd of October from Haryana. 25,000 landless people marching for 10 days, 2nd to the 11th, Gandhi Jayanti to Jayaprakash Jayanti. 5 issues. 1, the issue of homestead. 5 to 6 crore people in this country are under a plastic sheet on the roadside, on the railway track, on the side of the bank, on the bank of the river. So large number of people without an inch of land to call their own. Any day, any moment, their plastic can be demolished. One day it will be demolished by the forest department, next day by the highway department, third day by some other department, because it doesn't belong to them. They are on some land. So one major demand is that there should be a Homestead Guarantee Act in this country. Anybody born in this country should have at least 10 cents of land to put up a shed, put up a house. The second demand is the one related to land and women, right, which I just explained, that the parliament should enact a law. The Swaminathan's bill should be enacted as a law and recognize women as farmers. The third one is proper implementation of all the laws like Forest Rights Act, you know about Forest Rights Act, Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation, Resettlement Act. These are progressive acts as a result of many years of struggle, but they are not implemented. See, in spite of all our efforts, Forest Rights Act is not getting implemented in many states. It was stayed in the state of Tamil Nadu, where the Forest Department went to the High Court and got a stay. Only recently the stay was vacated. So, whereas the first para of Forest Rights Act says, historical injustice was done to Adivasis of this country, and in order to correct this historical injustice, this act is being enacted. And what happened to that act? Right. So this progressive act of Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation, Resettlement Act, which Bhuvana was referring to. So that is one, implementation and monitoring mechanism to see that it is being done. Then the fourth demand is that we need fast track court in this country, fast track mechanism to resolve land disputes. Imagine 64% of cases in the court of India, all courts put together, are revenue related cases, land related cases. And if you don't add any more, with this speed, it will take 250 years before we can resolve it. That's the speed at which our courts are moving. Now, in one lifetime, I cannot settle my land issue. As a poor man, my land is occupied by a rich man, and I want to get him out, but it will take 250 years. So I will not be here before I get my land. So this is a very complicated thing, and we are asking for fast track court to deal with it. So there are many issues around which 25,000 people are going to march to Delhi. So please keep an eye on it. Please come and join. And see that we are able to put enough pressure on the government on this issue of land. Right? And land, not one issue, many. Issues related to slums and cities are already explained so well by both of you. So what I am trying to do in the next few minutes will be to look at it from the other angle. You are speaking from the urban side. What is happening in the rural area, right? You know about it, but then I will just run through 2-3 issues. One, the transfer of resources. What are the resources? Livelihood resources like land, forest, water, minerals. That is taking place at an alarming rate. You can't even imagine. As we speak here, probably thousands of people are displaced. In the name of wildlife sanctuary, in the name of national park, in the name of forest protection and reserve forest, in the name of companies, in the name of mining. Thousands of people are displaced every day. Where are they going to go? They have to finally end up in the slums that you are speaking about. They have to come to the cities in search of livelihood. And all these Adivasis are not used to cities. They don't know how to cope with city and city life. They are forced to come to cities. They lose their culture. They lose their relations. Imagine when a particular tribal community is displaced and some goes to Ahmedabad, some goes to Delhi, some goes to Bombay. Their drums and dances, everything is gone. Their life is gone, their culture is gone. So this displacement is a huge crime that we are committing on these poor people in the name of development. And this idea of development can be redefined only by you, not by the poor people there. We can only fight. But you are crazy, you are fed with this idea of a development model. Right? We need better houses, we need farmhouse. We need our children in America. When they come back, everybody should have a house, one in Chennai and one in Bangalore and one in Calcutta, one in Bombay, one in Delhi. See, we are crazy. Even though some people do criticize, but then generally the urban population get carried by this model of development. Right? So how do we handle it? The poor people are asking this question. Look, we are victims of your dream. Can you change your dream? Can you re-articulate your dream so that you can include us in your dream? It's a serious question, and I was very happy to listen to what you said today. And how do we get an inclusive dream for a country called India? It is excluding everybody. The Dalits and Adivasis, fisher folks and nomads have no place in this dream today. So one demand is, can you help us to rework on this development model? Or they are asking, why are you only speaking about external development? Can't you also think about internal development? People developing as better human beings. Only material will be development, or will Indian people behave differently? Will they be more sensitive, more kind, more compassionate? That's the kind of development they are asking for. So one important question I bring back to you is, how do we together rework on this model? Otherwise there is no ground for poor people, right? Because with this speed, we used to say 80% people live in villages. What do we say now? 65% people live in villages. How did this happen? This 15%, where are they? And soon by 2030, only 50% people will live in villages, and sooner or later it will be like Brazil. 80% people will live in cities and slums, and only 20% people will be in the rural areas. And you know what is happening in Brazil. So it's almost like a Brazilization of India. What is happening now, right? Soon we will create a Brazil out of India. 80% in the cities and slums, and 20% in the villages. So please look at that question. I mean, whenever you get time, I know you, this is an enlightened group, so I'm not speaking to you, right? When I say you, this is basically the urban audience who should listen to this question. The second issue is related to, see, recently when Mr. Kapoor came to India, he gave an interview to Hindu. Many of you must have read it. Kapoor is heading the Department of Indian Studies in the University of Pennsylvania. And Kapoor says, how many institutions you may create in India, you will never deliver justice to the poor people. You may have hundreds and thousands of institutions, but you will never deliver justice to the poor people of India. And that's a very important statement. Let us look at it. He says institutions are buildings. You may create a commission for women and you will make a building and put a board. Then you will have a commission for the SC, ST, put a board and then make a big concrete building. Then you will have a commission for children, a big building, big board. Then you will have many new police stations with new paint, concrete buildings. You will have new collectorate in every place. You may create as many institutions as you want. These are all concrete buildings which cannot deliver justice. Justice is delivered by the person who is occupying that building. And unfortunately, the Indian system is producing a lot of inefficient, corrupt, insensitive young people who somehow get into these institutions and use the institutions in their benefit and not for the people. You may not like this statement, but Mr. Kapoor says so.
Sir, you mean Akash Kapoor, sir?
Eh?
Akash Kapoor. You mean Akash Kapoor?
Mr. Kapoor, Anil Kapoor. Yeah. So, you may not like this statement, but then there is a truth, right? All these young people, because of relationship, because of your capacity to pay a huge bribe, because of your relationship with the father, you get into these institutions. And your intention is not to deliver justice to the poorest, your intention is to make a life for yourself. And how do you deliver justice? And this is what I found when I was traveling through India for 1 year. I went just to find out this reality, I traveled 80,000 kilometers on road through 350 districts in 1 year. Everywhere. If you want to set up an industry or mining, first condition is that you need to have a public hearing. You call the people and ask whether you need this company here or not. All public hearings are conducted by district collectors and they are all fake. Why is it fake? The district collector will call all those who are supporting the company and keep the police outside the pandal to chase those who are opposing the company. So, if that is what a district collector does, from whom we have great expectations. District collector is someone who is highly educated and he will deliver justice. So if that is a level there, what is the level at the bottom, in the Thana, Kacheri? So this is a question which in Madhya Pradesh when they take out a rally, they shout one slogan, पढ़े लिखे नौजवानों अनपढ़ों को साथ दो. Please, educated young people try to help uneducated us. Right? That is one of their slogans. पढ़े लिखे नौजवानों. It's basically an appeal to the educated community of this country. Please behave. Now, how do you get this to colleges and to schools? I don't know. Because this level of education, how did a tool of liberation become a tool of oppression? Education as a tool of liberation has become a tool of oppression. Thane mein jao, go to police office, you get beaten up. You are asked for money. Go to a lawyer. It takes years and years, come again. How many times can an Adivasi go to a lawyer? to fight a case. Every time, pay 100 rupees, pay 200 rupees. Go to a doctor, go to any officer. He has no time to meet the poor people. I don't have to explain. You know that what is the educated community of our country doing to the masses, the poor people of this country. This need to change drastically. How do we change it? So the poor people are asking us, can't you go to Chennai and Bombay and Bangalore and tell these people to behave differently with us? It's a huge task. It's a huge, huge task. So that is one thing that we need to see. How do we answer to that call of these poor people? Then the problem of, that you should also be concerned, the problem of increasing level of conflict and violence. See, when you take forest, land, water, the poor man is not going to sit down quietly. He is going to fight back. And we don't have so many people to train every community to act non-violently. Right? Non-violent action is not known to everybody. It all depends who is giving leadership. It can also be violent. Imagine violence and counter-violence. People taking violence and police using violence, state violence. So much violence everywhere. What is happening? The Salem highway, Salem Chennai highway. What happened in Thoothukudi recently? People may use protest, and that protest may even turn slightly violent. Like they may block, etc. It is an opportunity for the state to use violence because it is legitimate violence. You can use violence. You are supposed to use violence. So violence and violence. Like Gandhi said, an eye for an eye. No? The world will be blind. So, what do we do with this growing level of violence? Are you happy with it? Is this how India is going to develop? In the interest of few, others will have to suffer. And people like us will play this role of empowerment of poor people. Empowerment will lead into struggle. And all the struggles will be suppressed by using state violence. And out of frustration, people will also start using violence. So please see, can we let a situation to develop where everything ends in violence? And then it is not only the villages, it is also the city that is going to suffer. So how do we address this question of increasing violence in this country? And so I stand in front of you to say, look, the space for people is getting limited every day. There's not a lot of space. The time is also getting shrunk. Not a lot of time. Every day villages are getting displaced. Villages after villages are getting displaced. Whichever color of the government, whichever color of the party, they will do the same thing. Like the Vijayawada example. Vijayawada example is an interesting example. The most organized city of India is Chandigarh. And for Chandigarh, the total land acquired was 15,000 acres. And in Vijayawada, to create this new capital, Amravati, 55,000 acres. And Chandrababu Naidu has found a new way to violate the new law, land acquisition, rehabilitation and settlement law. He says, I am not even touching that law. I am asking people to pool land. Land pooling is the new style. You are asking people to donate your land and then send the police to the village and say, if you don't donate your land, you know what is going to happen to you. So donate the land, force people to donate their land, and he says, I'm going to get 55,000 acres of land. The other day, we were there with Justice Gopal Gowda, and Gopal Gowda said, if I am the justice of the court of Andhra Pradesh, Chandrababu Naidu will be in jail for lifelong. So much violation. He has violated everything that is possible. So, this is happening at every point. So, what is my appeal? the poor people are looking towards the urban middle class. They say, look, we do what we can do. We are not sitting down and crying. We are acting. We are getting organized, we are acting. We are chasing the officials, we are fighting. We are taking out rallies of 50,000 and 1 lakh. We do what we can do. We raise our own money to do it. What is the urban middle class going to do in order to help us? And the time is limited. So I think let us listen to this appeal. Let us listen to this appeal. Without saying, look, we are guilty, etc. There is an urgent need for us to act. And how do we organize that act is important. So when Ravi Bhai said, there is an invitation for us to meet today, I said, probably this is an opportunity to talk to you and then see how in the coming days we can organize urban middle class, educated young people to be in solidarity with those struggles all over the country. And because of their struggle, they are winning. I mean, in POSCO they had some success. In Niyamgiri they had some success. In many places they had some success. But that is not good enough. So to make development inclusive, to make India a peaceful country, there is an urgent need for us to act, for us in urban areas to act. And I hope we will listen to that request and act upon it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rajagopal. Very powerful speech, and I think you have given a lot for us to think about, really. Thank you. And thank you, Bhuvana and Preeti. So the sessions were quite enlightening. The floor will be open for discussion now, for questions rather. Thank you, Bhuvana and Preeti. I think it was quite enlightening, and we had heard your views on land use and land rights, or rather the lack of it maybe. So now the floor is open for questions. Panelists, if you can come onto the stage.
First of all, Balaji from Mailapur. First of all, I should read the history of slums, creation of slums. Slums were created by the government of that day for vote bank politics, right? There is no mention of that. Another thing is about the 8-lane highway. You have not mentioned about that 8-lane highway. So you mentioned only about Sri Perambur Oragadam belt. You should see that 8-lane highway at Chennai Salem. Because government itself is projecting it as a own project, not a private project. So many people are getting affected by that. So what is the review? Salem highway is being created for iron and steel ore extraction by a private company, maybe Jindal. What is the review? So I'm asking.
The question that I wanted to ask was about you spoke about land rights, the patta for the slum dwellers in the newly rehabilitated buildings, right? You said that did not have a legal sanctity, or I did not get the proper definition of what you meant.
If you can briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, this is Prashant Gautam. I come from Araporiakam. Thanks.
That's a question to.
Yeah, Preeti. It's for Preeti. Yeah, thanks.
Should we maybe answer these? Okay. Yeah. How slums were created, it's kind of a slightly different history in various cities. For instance, in Delhi, the post-partition, huge kind of refugee camps became kind of labor camps that the government in turn used, and so forth. In Chennai, of course, I think I touched upon vote bank politics quite specifically a little later in the talk, and my question had exactly to do with that. The slums have been a huge vote bank, and it was a symbiotic relationship between the government and the people that enabled people to continue to live in the central city and access opportunities, livelihood, education, access to half decent services, like water and sanitation within the city in exchange for votes. And it is exactly the breakdown in this kind of relationship that we see in contemporary Chennai. And I think I got to that a little later. This is not about why slums were created or what the needs are. I think that's kind of a complex question that has to do with urbanization and the influx of people coming into city exactly in search of livelihood. I don't think the livelihood question becomes moot just because people living in slums also are necessarily vote banks. And to answer your question I'm not saying that there's no legal sanctity to the documents that are given to people upon resettlement. What happens when people are resettled is that they receive what are called hire purchase agreements, which is basically a way to commit to paying some kind of down payment and some amount of monthly dues to the TNSCB as a way to own your house at the end of say 15 or 20 years. It's quite like owning a car or quite like owning a house otherwise, right? Where you take out a loan and then at the end of that period, you own the house. But I'm saying so few people get to the end of that cycle because of the other kind of problems, right? The inability to pay dues is one thing because there's a huge loss to livelihood and family income from the resettlement. But also, but also more broadly, the resettlement houses themselves are of like really poor, are in really poor repair. You have like the walls chipping away and so forth, and people are like, why am I paying dues to be able to live here, right? So it's both a kind of created inability to pay the dues, but also a reluctance to pay those dues because what are you getting for everything that you pay? And a lot of people also leave these tenements to move back to the city. So the end of that cycle towards ultimately owning has happened in very few cases, which were I think the numbers that I spotted on.
The title which comes later is perfectly legal, right?
You get a sale deed,
sale
right?
deed, yeah.
Which is different from absolute title, and I think we Bhuneshwari refer to that. But the sale deed does make what your apartment an asset in the sense that you can mortgage it, you can buy and sell and rent within market parameters.
I just have one small question, if I can, to Bhuneshwari ma'am. You mentioned about Singara Chennai, and you went a little fast in that in that flow. So, if you can little bit emphasize on that and clarify what you meant to say in a little more detail, if you can.
Excuse me, one more question. Actually, you said the people who are brought in could come up in life, so make living in the city, but the same people are sent back without any facilities in the outskirts, or without any schools or a place to work. So reverse, the next generation is made to live like that.
They're set back by a couple of generations when they've moved out because you've lost access to the very things you came to the city for. Absolutely.
Yeah, in response to your question, the larger argument that I wanted to place is that it is the real estate led urban development that is dominant now. And whether you take the Sri Perumbudur Oragadam case where they enter into a explicit partnership with developers, or you take the Salem highway, the model is very much based on capturing land value. And if you have to capture, the classic example where it started was the Bangalore-Mysore corridor, BMIC corridor, which also the Nandi infrastructure investment, which became a little problematic because it was a special purpose institution. It started as the idea is that how do I finance infrastructure? Earlier it was through taxation, then it moved into the credit. You borrowed either from the bank or from the ADB, or you floated bonds, or you floated via capital market. None of these strategies, if you look city by city, really worked. Then what is it left for me? How do I play the real estate? When it comes to it, right in the, whether it's the BMIC corridor or Salem Chennai, it becomes absolutely necessary. What they do is they often acquire more than what they really need. In the Bangalore-Mysore corridor, the BMIC acquired 5 times the land they needed, and it's very much, if you read the, it's very much closer to, if you read the how IT companies kind of start with open source software, and then once the thing is developed, you close it, you come up with your intellectual property. And Oracle is classic, it's pretty much like that. I open a road, I invest in the road, I allow the traffic to move through. The fact that I allow the traffic to move through, and the fact that I've invested the road automatically plays onto the land value. Then all I need to do is get a few people settled. In the BMIC case, they never sold the first parcel of 100 feet of land from the road to any middle class layouts or popular layouts. It were all these normal middle class layouts which the BDA, the Bangalore Development Authority, used to do. That model was often 100 feet away from the road. On abutting the road, you had townships, you had these gated housing community. So the way is, I acquire land, whether I am a private developer or the state, I kind of play the same real estate logic, right? So the idea of the state and its duty towards a larger public is really lost in this financial logic. The second thing is, if you look at a lot of these developers company, like you take Hiranandani, who is the operating director of the Hiranandani, the ex-director of HUDCO, and who is sitting in your Godrej Brigade developers. It's one of the well-known commissioners, and who then became the very senior secretary in the government of Karnataka. And basically this embeddedness becomes critical, because this is where they play both the private domain and the state domain. So this, what's also happening in these companies is that we also need to think about the state developer divide. It sometimes becomes, it's one, just like the American politics, the same people in different institutions and crafting it. That is my response. I did not do Salem highway because I don't know much about it. I drew a lot of it from where I worked and I was sure of. But I know of BMIC, this is the logic. And now when the Karnataka government and the Kimani, Mr. Ashok Kimani entered into a problem, and now he has moved out the entire land out of the nice infrastructure and created a private infrastructure. Now the danger with all of these is, the case is still in the court, but even the government is like trying to wonder, government of Karnataka is trying to wonder, how do you now do it? Because you have created a nice institution and given it a nice private protection under the Private Company Act, because most special purpose vehicle do not necessarily sit in the public domain. And this is the way that makes you wonder, where is the state? Who is a developer here? What is common across is the logic that you play, and the logic seems to be the real estate logic, and it's very crass logic, and even the state overlooks it. And you can see it in the case of digitization of land records that they did in Bangalore. It was done from IT department, and the IT department claimed that without these transparent land records we are not going to have it. And I remember going to Magadi, and it also said the first come first will get it digitized, and once it's digitized, that is the legal. You to make changes are very difficult, because the rhetoric was, it is the lawyer officials, lawyer and the middle officials who are the sources of corruption, and here is the commissioner and the additional commissioner and the collector who's going to sit there and be custodians of justice. Basically, if you know Karnataka and if you know Mutaparai, who does a lot of land deal, he just came to Magadi and got entire land of that village digitized, and you had all the farmers waiting. Then they said, look, this is very transparent. Now you can see who's owning what. Yes, it's like a glass building. I can see what's a murder is taking place across the glass facade, but I can't do anything about it. And what did they do with the records? They sold the records. It was very openly discussed in every Bhumi meeting. Oh, we need finances for the department. Now we can sell this records to BDA and make money. We can sell this to Food Corporation because they need ration card. So it goes much more. If your conventional idea of where the state is, what is the logic by which it governs, also needs to be rethought of if we in this politics. Yeah, that's my response.
Thank you very much. My name is Jagannathan. I work with the World Bank and United Nations. I'm based in Amsterdam. We did a lot of projects in Africa. I personally did done appraisals and prepared and monitored the projects for this. Now there are two things. One is the lady also you talked about. World Bank doesn't say you have to take bribe and do the project. We have to fund the project. We fund power stations, water, so on and so forth. So the idea that we have to differentiate I don't want to make it a comment. I have a question rather, just shortly. The question is, what is it wrong with the model or is it wrong with the way it is implemented? See, these need to be differentiated. Now in India, in this call the cases, not much of is wrong with the way the model is because Singapore has done similar things in a much better way. However, the way once there is a correction, what Rajagopalji just said, that you can create institution and resolve with wrong people, corrupt people, naturally nothing will go wrong. But we can see that certain similar what World Bank models are not the first thing new. It has been experimented in other countries. A lot of experience have been gained, and then they try to replicate that model in other countries. But if something is wrong, because lot of personal, ambitions and gain things, there is one thing. So coming back to the point you said, which is very important, is that if you have wrong people who are corrupt in the system, our amount of institution created won't be used. So then we come back to the question, we are called for support to the resistance and all that. We have seen resistance in Tamil Nadu. Yeah, people went to Delhi 5 months before, they were camping in the Delhi and all, gimmicks and things went on, but nothing was heard. So whether it's 10,000 people, 15,000 people, if the ministry there in Delhi doesn't hear what the reaction is, because they are not directly accountable, so what is the solution kind of thing? How does it work? Because Tamil Nadu has been full of demonstrations, nothing seems to be happening. No change is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Jagannathan. You are still in the World Bank. So I think it's not only those who are implementing, but also the model itself need to be challenged. A top-down model has its own problem. The very example that you are citing is Singapore. And now Chandrababu Naidu is sold off this idea that he should create a Singapore, Vijayawada, destroying all the crops and farmers. So ideas are very often coming from the top. These ideas, no, it is not including the aspiration of people. And we all know that all countries are not the same. The model that is applicable to Europe cannot be applicable to Asian countries. Culturally, geographically, it is very different. So insisting that there is one particular model and that model should be applied all over the world is not going to work. This is going to create a lot of conflict and problems. So Gandhi was suggesting a Gram Swaraj model. Can people dream of their own society? How do I want to visualize my society, my life, around land, forest, water, etc.? And this model doesn't allow people to dream. They are told that, look, you behave, otherwise you will be finished off. And the corporate houses are given that freedom to come in and do what they want to do. Like, if I want to give you an example, Jindal comes to an area, Jindal comes to an area, and people say, Adivasis say, look, we have a way of life and we don't want to destroy it. We are happy with nature. We are happy with the community. You may call us primitive, no problem, but then we are a dignified community, self-sufficient community. Please don't destroy us. But government of Madhya Pradesh is giving, Chhattisgarh now, giving him 40 acres of common land, which people can't say no. You get 40 acres of common land. Then you get bank loan to go for a deep bore well. You draw all the underground water, and all the hand pumps and tanks go dry all around because you pump out as much water as in the ground. So finally people come to Jindal and say, please take our land because it is not more productive. So that is where we need to discuss about commons as well. You know how the coastal land, for example, it's commons, but then it is all in the private hands now. The grazing land is commons, it is all in the private hands now. So you get on to the commons, then you force people to give up their land, their life, their culture, etc. So rather than imposing a model from the top, can we help people to dream together about a country called India? That is where leadership is missing. See, this leadership can take ideas from outside, but this leadership has no capacity to help people to dream on their own. If history is correct, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, before they went to this development model, they had a kind of a micro-economic development model through land distribution, agriculture, etc. On that micro model, it was easy for them to put up a macro model of development. So society could participate in that process. Here what is happening is just the opposite. People can't participate, they are just victim of that. And I think that's where World Bank can help. World Bank is one institution to which Government of India listens to because they need money, and money comes with ideas. So if a group of people in World Bank can tell India, for example, India may develop differently than South Africa or Ghana or Senegal. So let us develop a different model. And I personally feel, Jagannathanji, that if India was able to develop a model that is bottom up, many countries in the world could have repeated that. A different economic model, not only the economic model of Europe that is failing now. Right? That is what they tell me, that our model is failing, and why are you guys in India going the way we went? So I think the model also need to be critically looked at. Not only the people follow very often the model that we suggest. So I think institutions need to be modified. People need to behave differently, but we need to rethink about the model as such. Can we get back to Gandhi's model of a bottom-up development?
Preeti explained about the MUDP. Actually, I mean, if you look at a little bit of the history of the slum, somebody was saying that it's creation of the politician, which is a totally wrong, assessment. Because slums were basically created out of a need for housing of the poor who had migrated from the villages looking for jobs, and wherever they got jobs, in fact the slogan of the freedom movement was squat, telling the people who came into the city that they should squat on public land. And that is the way slums developed, and that was one of the main slogans of the freedom fighters in the city of Chennai. So squatter, that is why the settlements, the slum areas as a name came in after independence. Before independence, they were called as squatter settlements. So squatter settlement is the name, and whether it was Jivanandam, Shingaravelar, MC Raja to S. Krishnamurti, who later became mayor of Chennai. So all these people were, you should say, to some extent, those days, as freedom fighters, they were part of the whole movement of the slum dwellers. It is not actually the political parties. It was not the parties. And they were oriented towards organizing the slum dwellers, protecting them, and even in the 1937 legislature, even at those days, there was a one-line law which was passed, and that is, no slum will be evicted. So, protection of slum dwellers against eviction. That was a one-line law. Again in 1956, that was the law which was passed. And then again in 1970, the DMK came to power, and the DMK brought in, of course the DMK grew through the slum movement. Of course there is a lot of history. Actually originally it is the communists who grew through the slums, and then once they moved away from the slums, the DMK kind of got in, and even S. Krishnamurti helped them, this and that, and then the DMK came to power and all that, and then the Slum Act was passed, and initially they only wanted to implement the tenement system, in the 1970s, early 70s, and only after 77 the whole World Bank scheme came. The only thing actually what I wanted to mention is, see, the MUDP scheme is one of the very successful schemes in the city, because wherever MUDP was implemented in situ, there people have developed their houses because they have their livelihoods around the area, and they developed the houses, all that. But the sale deed was not given to most of the people who, actually most of the people paid the money, but still sale deed they delayed by decades. And because basically the attitude is slums can be evicted, they want to keep them under that kind of vulnerable state. That is the main reason why the sale deeds were not given, nor was the patta given. So actual promise made by the World Bank, of course he is not here, the promise that was made in the World Bank scheme was not delivered, while the other shifted people, the resettled people, there the people themselves, many of them moved back living in rentals because they didn't have jobs, they didn't have, the education of children was affected. So it's almost like now they have become like ghettos, so where people are dumped, and there's so much of antisocial activities, drugs and everything, and no jobs, and it's almost like a shame on what the Slum Act professes to do. It is in violation of the Slum Act. That's the unfortunate.
My name is Sudhir. I just want to ask all three of you. All three of you implicated massive institutional failure. You see? Even if there were some exceptional, examples of projects that worked, maybe in the early 70s or in the mid 70s. Yeah, what we are seeing, especially in the last 30 years, is basically massive institutional failure, right? And Rajagopalji, you talked about basically the lack of time, you see, and the really, alarming rate at which land, water, forest and minerals are being monetized, commodified, yeah, taken away from people, and their ability to, prosecute their own lives, being, thrown out of the window, that's the kind of situation that we are talking about, But doesn't this description, also mean that we have to review, whether the kind of strategies that we have been depending on the last, 5 or 6 decades, that of organization and protest, and appeals, yeah, and pressure on this institutional, network, yeah, to deliver. I mean, Rajagopalji, You mentioned yatras that were, you see, scheduled to reach Delhi, yeah, and put pressure on Parliament to enact a law, how do you say, recognizing women farmers as legitimate, you see, owners of land, yeah. But you also spoke about so many progressive laws that are not implemented, you see. So is this entire, I mean, isn't this entire picture of the state, yeah, and its, how do you say, ability to, how do you say, to dampen, to receive and to ameliorate the, you see, the strength of resistance and struggle, demands made by people, you see, absorb it in such a manner that it can continue to reproduce, you see, basically the project of, you see, privilege, the promotion of privilege and, you see, exclusion, right? So you again refer to Gram Swaraj, you see, and basically pluripotential governance. The fact that we need literally hundreds of thousands of initiatives, you see. I want to also refer to the, how do you say, to the demands that climate change and warming is placing on this entire argument, you see. The fact that, you see, studies over the last 10 to 15 years, especially those which are with using or employing a systemic perspective, you see, they are pointing to the fact, you see, that the trajectory of the earth system, yeah, into a hothouse pathway, you see, may not have more than 10 or 15 years at the outside, maybe 20 years, you see, before we become locked into, you see, processes of feedback, positive feedback, you see, which are going to push, you see, climate conditions across the world, you see, into such dire, you see, outcomes that we have not seen, or that we have not seen, that have not been seen for the last 800,000 years, you see, and this is likely in a span of 100 years. So what we do, see, we are very, how do you say, clear about why, you see, this kind of warming, you see, and the pace and acceleration and the rate at which it is progressing, you see, has everything to do with the monetization of, you see, land, water, forest and minerals. It has everything to do with the power of finance capital. It has everything to do with the collaboration of the state, you see, with finance capital, and how they play the, you see, the institutions in a manner in which they act as a scaffolding, you see, for these, you see, private players to, you see, continue to promote the land grab that they are involved in, you see. So what the question is, you see, don't we need to reconceive, yeah, our strategies? Don't we need to think in terms of popular control of the commons, you see, which has to, you see, flower from 100,000 places, you see. What is Ekta Parishad doing if it's not doing that, you see? I think basically that is the reason why, I mean, you organize people in so many, you see, in so many different community-based groups. So I'm asking you, do these yatras and do these demands, you see, have significance any longer? Do these appeals to the middle class, you see, to reform themselves, you see, have any significance? You see, when we are talking about a window of maybe 1 or 2 decades, you see, and the kind of you see, pressure on land, the kind of, you see, how do you say, projects for land grab are running at the scale and the pace that you are referring to. Do we have the time? You see, this is my question.
This is 2 and 3 of us.
I think all of us are implicated in this because I think first, to your question on, yes, the old strategies are definitely not enough, because in the old strategies of organizing and protest, it was very clear there was a state, there was a law, and they are like implementing the law or not implementing the law, so they can attack. But now they are devising the game in many different rooms, and we don't even know where they are devising and who is playing. So basically, whilst organizing protest, all of them have its place. A spectacle, yatra, kind of sends a message. There is pressure coming from below. I wouldn't discount it. But in addition to it, I also think that basically we need to rethink about how we understand the whole several concepts. Particularly, these are all coming also about our education, about how we understand the world, how we understand what is productivity, what is efficiency, what is development. So I guess it is in many spheres. It's in the sphere of knowledge production. It's also in the sphere of counter political movements, as well as you need these strategies of protest and agitation to just keep the pressure going. It's almost like playing with different cards, and you need all the cards. And most importantly, definitely each of us need to, I guess, at least from my point, I'm implicated in this capitalist system. The fact that I'm sitting here and talking is coming out of a LSE education, which may be started as a think tank, but completely embedded in corporate things. So whatever it is, somewhere, how do we break it? How do we think of an alternative ways of living as well as alternate knowledge system, as much as organizing? That's my response. Just to your response on the models. Models are implicated. Models are not very innocuous things. They are imposed on a context with their own long political economic histories. Why did Bhumi fail? Bhumi was flouted by the World Bank as a model project for land titling. Why did it fail? Simply, it was imposed in a context, ignoring the history, ignoring what it is, giving a meaning of transparency. Or then take the entire series of World Bank projects here. When they shaped the institutions, it was logical, but both on the World Bank side and on the CMDA side, they are made of people, their pressures, their aspirations, and end of the day, their own mobility within these systems. So basically, just like World Bank officials saw CMDA as a useful place to do their experiment, CMDA bureaucrats also saw the World Bank to introduce certain conditionalities. And I link it to Singara Chennai question, which I failed to answer. The reason I said it is because when Singara Chennai came in, Stalin, the ex-chief minister's the son was at his helm, and the way he dealt it was extremely different. That was the point when cadres were just called to the place and said, now take it and leave it. And his alliance with the then bureaucrat and the leaning towards large infrastructure companies and the contracts that were given out were extremely different from his father's time. Because I say this with confidence, because if you take the Gandhinagar railway station, that is also, and you can also speak to the Sridharan, who now heads the Delhi metro thing. Basically, the metro and the bureaucrats wanted that entire set of slums to be removed. And okay, it is Maran's constituency, but Karunanidhi just said, no way, just remove the alignment. And the planners were dead against it. So it is like, once when we think about institutions and people, corruption can happen at any level, right? And people are people. It is about that leadership that we have and the imagination that it is more than, I'm not saying Karunanidhi was a saint, but at least the thinking that it has to be a larger public is what shifted within the DMK party, and that is very much linked to their own political economy. They moved from this dependency on their own constituency to a large telecommunication based economy, and with it change the relationship. Then it also come into the centralization of power. What happened there, you can trace a similar bureaucracy, a story within the bureaucracy. End of the day, institutions are like cards. How are you balancing the power between different people, and how are you balancing it? That is where it tilted in our context.
Thank you, Sudhir sir. You put it much more eloquently than I was trying to. But part of but part of the things that I mean, only because the title of today's discussion is also about where does potential for resilience lie, and part of the things that I was getting at was also, I mean, is also in this kind of chain of appropriation, right? Like people take over land, the government takes over your land, and then you leave these tenements you were given in the outskirts and come back to the city to squat. Really, I think this, I may sound both a little militant as well as naive when I say that perhaps the new catchword must also be squat in a sense, right? That it is with more active appropriation of lands that are being held back to realize some kind of imagined potential value in the future rather than what they can do today, and not and what they can do in not market logic terms, right? Which I think comes back to the use value versus exchange value question of land, and part of, for me, I think the potential for resilience also lies in this kind of active takeover, and we see that, we already see that in how slums expand, right? They start as something small and then they grow and the edges are growing, and I think that's like active appropriation, and it happens all the time. And if we find ways to have that going in a sense, or if the government realizes that this particular model of like getting rid of slums in the city is really not working, because you're not going to be able to create a slum-free city precisely because there is a constant takeover, and there should be a constant takeover of central city land. And also, how can we imagine protecting this land outside of market logic, if not through pattas or whatever? How can we ensure a certain sustained access to the commons? And I don't know if we'll be able to do that without the help of institutions. But I think for me, I've been trying to think through this stuff in my dissertation, and it's still quite early to make any sense of it. But also to think of institutions not as monoliths, but to think of ways through which institutions themselves, and I think this is getting to, I mean, it's about strategy and about how to play each one against the other or together or whatever, but also to look at institutions as, as not monoliths, and to see if there's room for some kind of transformation even within this idea that we have of this of institutions. And I think that goes to also the very nature of like bureaucracy and democracy in the Indian polity, right? Of lower level bureaucrats, and what it means to participate and to negotiate with lower level bureaucrats. That's actually quite different, or can be quite different from engaging head on with an institution per se. So I don't know if I'm doing the best job of this, but maybe these are some ways to think of how to engage with or not institutions. Basti Sabas.
That is a question which I would like to explore with you further. What kind of an institution can transform the situation in which we are today? Once we thought NGOs will do. Soon we realized NGOs are too limited to change the situation. That is where people's movements emerged. And today even people's movements are too limited to deal with the present situation. So we need to explore what kind of formation will help in dealing with these issues. But I always believed what Gandhi and Jayaprakash said, that people's power should be above state power. In democracies, people should have the capacity to control and make the state accountable. If we don't have it, there is something wrong. The way we are organizing ourselves. And they demonstrated that it's possible. Jayaprakash demonstrated, Gandhi demonstrated. And why are we not able to demonstrate? So this is a challenge to ourselves. I remember when Gandhi was thrown out of the train in South Africa. Initially he said, he thought it's better to commit suicide. It's shameful, right? Then he said, no, this is good to go back home. And later on he said, no suicide, no going back. Fight oppression and injustice. And that feeling need to come. Of course, non-violent, but then the capacity to stand up and fight injustice and oppression at every level. Why are the Indians lacking it? Why are we into this goodies, getting some money, getting some benefits out of this process without caring for others? So I think we need to think about the strategies. Let me also say, you read through all the 17 sustainable development goals set by the United Nations. Put them into 4 blocks. That's what I'm trying to do. 17 can be brought into 4 blocks. 1, we want to fight poverty. 2nd, we want to fight exclusion. 3rd, we want to fight violence. 4th, we want to fight climate crisis. These are the 4 major blocks. This is something everybody has committed. All nations have gone to put their signature. They have signed. So can people get away just by putting signature? Can I say I want to fight poverty and come back and create poverty? Can I say I want to reduce exclusion and come back and create more exclusion? I say I want to fight violence and come back and get into very violent economic model and development model. And I commit that I want to fight climate crisis, earth crisis on the planet, and I come back and do just the opposite. We need to get this world out of this contradiction. All leaders are doing the same. So how can people, including United Nations, how do we make these institutions responsible not only to put signature but to act upon what you have signed, whether it is a law on land or a document over there? Let me conclude by saying I was very happy to read this novel called Ishmael. I think you must have read it. Ishmael. Ishmael is a novel. It's out already 2 years back. This is a discussion between a gorilla in the cage and an activist outside. And the gorilla is telling the activist, look man, I am more powerful than you are. If I wanted to finish off this planet, I could have done it. But I understood new life will come on earth. I am not the last one to occupy this earth. New life will come on earth, so I behaved. Otherwise, as a gorilla, I could have destroyed everything. But you are behaving as if you are the last one to occupy this planet. Please change yourself. Please correct yourself. A very interesting novel to read through. And I think there is an awakening call, wake-up call that the author is trying to do. I think this is time to just to say, look, I can only think what is within my reach. I can get 1 lakh people to act. Right? So I do that. Rather than saying I can't do anything, I do what I can. The squirrel effort that you call in Ramayana, however, even the squirrel can do something in building a bridge. So that is what each one of us need to do. But at the same time, like you said, focus on this global realities and see how the planet can be saved. Good agenda. I hope, today the time is running. So I hope we will be able to really address some of these questions that are raised here, and probably you could organize another seminar to go deeper into it. Right? Yeah.
Why we are not able to organize it?
When I look at the conversation, how the conversation follows, I think, in 2 broad. My name is Ravi Badri. I work with Ekta Parishad. One conversation is in understanding the nuances in which globalization is operating, and that's what Bhuvana ma'am and Preeti had unpacked for us to help us understand what are the many subtler and newer ways in which globalization is coming inside and creating havoc. The other conversation that is missing is how do we transform it? What are we going to do to transform the situation? So this is an appeal or a question for us also in the group. Can we create and design different kinds of spaces for dialogue and reflection? Rather than having few experts and we being the listener, which is very convenient for us, to be consumers of knowledge as opposed to producers of knowledge. Each one of us can produce knowledge. Each one of us has enough in our brain, our intellectual power to produce new knowledge. So what new knowledge do we need to produce to transform the society? And that conversation is missing. We keep getting caught up in understanding the nuances of how globalization is percolating into our lives. To respond to the question of Sudhir, one of the things that we speak about is there is immense research in violence. There is a lot of research in how violence can be perpetuated. And people like scholars are unpacking that. The way the institutions are being modified is coming out of a research of organizations and institutions, which is showing the powers that be to how to perpetuate violence. Are we doing enough research on how to perpetuate non-violence? Are we having those kinds of conversations? Are we brainstorming? Are we searching for that? Are we churning for those answers? And I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we are. From our 25 years of experience in Ekta Parishad, we speak about 4 pillars of transformation. If we want transformation, there are 4 pillars. One is the power of people. It's people's power that can bring about change. The second is power of young people who can organize the people. The third is the power of non-violence. And the fourth that is missing is the power of solidarity. What are the different ways we can express our solidarity? I love the organizing group's name, Citizen, Consumer and Civic Action Group. Where is the civic action in our respective cities? What is the percentage of people who are actively engaged? We speak about creating inclusive spaces, but are we creating inclusive spaces ourselves? As scholars, as researchers, our language is so exclusive. A common person on the street cannot understand what we're speaking. So also, as activists, our language is very exclusive. We are speaking with so much emotion that a common person immediately shuts down. Right? So, and there is no dearth of progressive people in the city. There are a lot of progressive people, a lot of concerned people who just don't understand what is happening. And if they understand, they don't know what to do. Right? I think there is, and Chennai has an amazing group of people who are doing many interesting progressive experiments. They're trying what they can do at their own personal level. How do we create inclusive spaces for more and more people to engage? That's a very transformative question. How do we create spaces for people to engage and reclaim their power as citizen? When people begin to reclaim the power as citizen and question the state, and that becomes viral, borrowing the term of the new social media, when that becomes viral, we can see a situation where people's power can keep the state power under check. When 1 lakh people walk on the street, how many urban voices are standing up and saying, this question matters? When Mr. P. Uday Kumar is raising a question in Kodankulam, how many people in cities are saying that we don't want power at the cost of Kodankulam? When farmers are walking, how many people are standing up and saying, we want cheap food, but not at the cost of farmers having to subsidize for us? Let us think of a new economic model. How many of us, progressive, educated Indians, are making that statement? And if enough of us make that statement, the government will have to take us seriously. There is no escape for the government. But how many of us are doing that? Are we able to demonstrate that collective power and synchronize these actions? It is not just about Ekta Parishad. In November, farmers are going to walk. In Nasik, in March, farmers again walk. This is about showing solidarity with all those movements, being informed and doing what we can from our cities and creating those islands, creating those oases of action, nurturing them, holding them and continuing that. So I think we need to have a different kind of a conversation rather than a question answer session where we are going deeper and deeper to understanding the nuances of globalization. I feel that conversation is missing. This conversation of the nuances, it is very important for people who are most affected. And that I think is the kind of a bridge between the scholar and the organizers, where this knowledge can inform future organizing. I'm not discounting that, but we can't afford to get caught up in just that conversation. We desperately and very urgently need a new kind of conversation, a new kind of dialogue spaces for us to brainstorm, think about new forms of communication. How do we initiate somebody through this understanding? We very quickly make a statement, development is not working. But does the common person in the street understand that? How many steps of learning the person has to go through to understand that this development is actually destruction? we don't think about it. We are in a hurry, right? Because we are in a hurry, we don't take the time and the patience that is needed to educate the common person. And I'm so glad that today Mr. Prasanna is also here, because he is, I think, showing us a very new experiment from Bangalore. And really, this is a wonderful coincidence. He took a yatra through villages speaking about Hind Swaraj, and now he's experimenting with creating a theatre performance on Hind Swaraj or on Gram Swaraj for the urban audience. And this is an experiment at transformation. I feel we need more and more such experiments in the urban spaces to help people in cities to understand that we are creating a Frankenstein's monster. We are shooting ourselves in our foot. So how do we do that? And that's a very, there's no answer to the question, but I think we need to put our heads to that and use all our intellectual power to answer that question. There's enough intellectual power and the right heart, the heart that is seeking a transformation, which is not being organized and channelized. So I just want to start with that, but that is what I was, why or feel from inside. Thank you.
So I think we come to the end.
Government usually conducts a public hearing for various projects. They have become bars, so only few people attend. So some of us have attended the Kanjipuram, Chennai.
I know. I was also there. So, so we have
to make it meaningful. Is there any way make it meaningful?
I think there is so much that we need to discuss about, and we should plan for a few more such sessions so that we will be able to discuss all the issues that are actually troubling us on a daily basis. So we should plan for this. I'm extremely sorry, but we are really running out of time. We are exceeded our time actually. So we would like to conclude now. I would like to thank the speakers once again, Mr. Rajagopal, Ms. Bhuneshwari and Ms. Preeti for joining us, and it was quite enlightening. Thank you all very much. And I would like to thank all of you, each one of you here for joining us today. Thank you all very much. And I would like to thank Arman. So Arman joined us very recently. It's not even 1 month since he joined us, and he has been instrumental in organizing this event. Thank you, Arman. And I would like to thank the MSSW management also for giving us this space within a very short period. Actually, we approached them. They were kind enough to give us this space to organize this event today. And we would also like to thank the team who's recording this event for us and the media. Thank you all very much.